Tonight on Ukraine Today, battlefield update. Ukrainian troops raised national flags in two villages in the Donetsk region. Kremlin's occupation plans. Moscow openly declares its intention to capture Sumy, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Mykolaiv and Odessa regions of Ukraine. Trump's big statement. Will the American leader really increase pressure on Russia? China's role, from Putin's meeting with Xi Jinping to Beijing's behavior throughout the full-scale war. All this and more, right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Rabchun. Please subscribe, hit the like button and let's get to the news. Ukrainian forces raised national flags in the villages of Udachne and Novoekonomichne in the Donetsk region. That's according to the General Staff. Moreover, the defense forces stopped the enemy's breakthrough attempt near Mirnograd. The occupiers tried to push through Novoekonomichne but instead lost equipment and manpower. In the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 800 troops killed and wounded. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,083,790 soldiers. Also, Ukraine destroyed one Russian tank, 4 armored vehicles, 53 artillery systems and dozens of other enemy assets. Air defense shot down 120 out of 150 enemy drones last night. Still, 30 attack UAVs hit 9 locations, while debris fell in 5 more places. In Bila Tserkva, apartment blocks, commercial and industrial buildings and garages were damaged. 1 person was killed. Russia also attacked Sumy. 4 residential buildings were damaged. There are wounded, including a child. And again, strikes on port infrastructure in the Odessa region. This time, no casualties and no major destruction. The occupiers increased the use of glide bombs. The Defense Ministry reports 3,786 bombs in July, 4,390 in August. The record was in April, more than 5,000 glide bombs. As for Moscow's goals, they no longer hide them. Kremlin officials say Russia must control the Ukrainian Sumy, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Mykolaiv and Odessa regions written into the so-called constitution. That's what Duma Defense Committee member Viktor Sobolev openly declared. This is Moscow's answer to Trump's envoy, Mr. Vitkov, who claimed Russia was ready to pledge in its constitution that it won't invade or seize any more territories. But the Russian constitution is a flexible one. They can add Ukrainian regions today, erase inconvenient rules tomorrow, and of course, they'll break their own promises. And by the way, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov already denied that Trump and Putin agreed on a trilateral meeting or even a separate meeting with Zelensky. Remember earlier, Trump himself announced that such a meeting would take place.
For now, what is being reported in the press is not exactly what we agreed upon there. Right now, everyone is talking about a trilateral meeting, about a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. But as far as I know, this specifically was not part of the agreement between Putin and Trump.
So the question is, what did Putin and Trump actually agree on in Alaska? My guess? Nothing. What do you think? Share in the comments. But one thing is clear, they did not agree on a ceasefire. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent pointed this out in an interview with Fox News.
When the European leaders and President Zelensky were at the White House the following Monday, has done the opposite of following through on what he indicated he wanted to do. As a matter of fact, he has, in a despicable manner, increased the bombing campaign. So I think with President Trump, all options are on the table, and I think we'll be examining those very closely this week.
And maybe, just maybe, the decision is already made. Tonight, Donald Trump is expected to deliver an important statement around 9 p.m. Kyiv time. The topic is not announced, but 2 things point to Russia's war against Ukraine. First, the 50-day deadline Trump gave Putin to sign a peace deal with Ukraine is running out. Second, it's been 2 weeks since Trump said he would decide on new pressure against the dictator. Though, who knows? Maybe it's all about a new iPhone or Coca-Cola made from melted Greenland ice with a hint of maple syrup. Xi Jinping called Russia and China the main victors of World War II. He said this during a meeting with Putin in Beijing. Xi Jinping added that China is ready to work with Russia to build a fairer and smarter system of global governance. By the way, Beijing and Moscow also agreed on a visa-free trial for Russians starting September 15th for 1 year. Plus, they signed a deal to build a gas pipeline through Mongolia. Against this backdrop, it's worth analyzing China's behavior throughout the full-scale invasion. That gives us some clues about what Beijing might do in terms of ending the war and future peace guarantees.
This is footage from the camera of a downed Russian Gerber drone. A recording from a Chinese factory where this UAV was being tested was found on it. The video was published by Ukrainian serviceman Serhiy Flash Beskresnov. The drone is equipped with an A40 Pro camera made by ViewPro. The factory is located in Shenzhen. The war in Ukraine has turned into a drone war, and for Russia it would now be impossible without Chinese supplies of components.
China supplies Russia with engines, antennas, drone control panels, and ready-made kits of civilian UAVs. For the fiber optic drones that have been actively used since last spring, China supplies Russia with fiber optic cables. Russia's own production is limited to a single factory, which became a target for the Ukrainian army in April. The largest Chinese fiber optic manufacturers, Yangtze Optical Fiber and Cable and Fiber Home Technologies, do not officially supply their products directly to Russia. However, according to an Index Box report, in 2024, China supplied 382,000 tons of fiber optic cable to Central Asian countries. By rough estimates, that's about 4 million kilometers of cable.
According to the publication Verstka, Beijing has become a key supplier of military technology to Moscow. On the last day of summer, Putin flew to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and also attended a military parade marking the end of World War II. It seems that China has decided to finally put an end to its game of being a neutral peacemaker in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Since 2022, one of the most serious threats to Ukraine has been the direct large-scale military assistance from China to Russia.
When it came to the Kremlin purchasing weapons from North Korea or Iran, its options were objectively quite limited: shells, drones, and missiles. But the Chinese defense industry consists of active production lines for all types of weaponry, some of which are directly compatible with Soviet and Russian systems. Source: Defense Express.
Since the beginning of the war, China has sharply increased its exports to Russia of materials used in the production of explosives. One of many examples, Beijing covers about half of Russia's needs for the stabilizer diphenylamine. This substance allows nitrocellulose to be stored and used for gunpowder production.
According to data from 2023, China supplies about 90% of Russia's imports of high-priority goods subject to G7 controls, as stated in the ICIC report. These are technologies necessary for the production of missiles, drones, and precision weapons. Components from Western manufacturers such as Texas Instruments, Intel, and Analog Devices continue to reach Russia through Chinese intermediaries. They have been found in downed Russian Iskander-M missiles, Kh-101 cruise missiles, and Lancet attack drones. In addition to electronics, China supplies Russia with industrial machinery necessary for military production. Chinese deliveries now account for more than half, or even up to 80% of Russia's imports of machinery, compared to 12 to 20% before the war. Edition layout.
Russian support is not only military supplies. During the war, China became the largest buyer of Russian oil and its largest trading partner in other areas.
Starting with the flow of cheap raw materials from Russia, which has become even cheaper. Ending with no one has ever been bothered by another country's dependence on you. So if it increases, but at the very least you're not worse off. Secondly, indeed, we're talking about how America is wearing down its own resources, wearing down Russia's resources.
If Russia becomes a pro-Western country that supports American policy towards Italy, China ends up in a strategic encirclement. Therefore, for China, throwing Russia under the bus and completely abandoning its support is absolutely unacceptable. Carnegie Alexander, director of the Berlin Center.
In the current format of the conflict, China is considered the biggest beneficiary of the Russia-Ukraine war, and Putin's visit to Xi is further proof of that. For China, there are only advantages in this case. It gets cheap resources from Russia and gains an additional geopolitical lever of influence in its maneuvers with the US and the EU.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And please, subscribe, hit that like button and share this video so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Russia's war is creating global instability. Countries that never thought about increasing their defense spending are now preparing. Turkey, for example, is building bomb shelters. Erdogan has approved construction in 80 provinces. Work has already begun in several cities, including Ankara. In Belarus, joint military drills with Russia have started. They'll even practice the use of nuclear weapons. Full details in our report.
Following Putin, Lukashenko has arrived in China to participate in the events of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. And on his territory, Russian troops have already been deployed. CSTO and Zapad 2025 exercises. What is happening on the border with Belarus while the two dictators have flown east?
They'll reach Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, capture 3 countries and so on, NATO countries.
Military exercises involving nuclear weapons have begun in Belarus. Ukrainian border guards have heightened their readiness.
We feel confident and calm here, and we're not hiding the subject of our exercises. We say that the main focus of the exercises is to practice defending our territory with the joint regional group of forces. These activities are scheduled.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have joined the Collective Security Treaty Organization exercises. China, North Korea and India refuse to participate.
Their statements directed at Belarus, claiming that Belarus or the Russian Federation are threatening someone, actually contradict the actions they themselves are taking.
According to preliminary estimates, about 3,000 servicemen will come from Russia. Belarus will deploy between 7 and 10,000. The maneuvers, according to the authorities of the Republic of Belarus, will take place at the Lozvida and Lipelsky training grounds.
Russia and Belarus are not just allies. We have a profoundly shared defense space, which we are actively strengthening due to the very complex and challenging international situation.
Belarus has planned several separate events, training for the collective rapid response forces called Interaction 2025, exercises involving reconnaissance assets called Search 2025, as well as maneuvers for logistics units called Echelon 2025.
The defense of our territory is carried out by a joint regional group of forces. This event is planned. It's not some sudden, impulsive decision or anything of that nature, but rather a carefully considered choice.
According to the official version, their goal is to practice joint defensive and offensive actions.
Since 2020, a decision was made to create a regional grouping. In this way, we strictly follow the decisions of our heads of state and hold these exercises every 2 years.
The rehearsal of the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik missile system has been announced. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already responded to the exercises.
We warn Minsk against reckless provocations. We advise them to remain prudent, not approach the borders, and not provoke the defense forces of Ukraine.
In Belarus, they swear that the nuclear weapons themselves will not be used.
You can't use something that, let's say, poses a threat to the whole world, to global security. So how do you plan for that? We'll learn.
Analysts suggest that these exercises may have a hidden goal, to create the conditions for amassing Russian troops and equipment on the territory of Belarus.
We are ready for the exercises. We're not hiding anything from anyone. We are truly demonstrating transparency, showing that these exercises are ours.
Such exercises traditionally cause concern among neighboring countries due to the risk of provocations, incidents, or unpredictable actions.
We have reduced the number of troops by almost half, moved their location deeper into our own territory, hundreds of kilometers away from the border, to training grounds.
And at the moment, Russian forces on Belarusian territory consist mainly of vehicles, a limited amount of armored equipment and personnel.
We are conducting these exercises independently by our own decision, without regard for the countries to our west. This is to raise the level of training of our servicemen and to improve the coordination between the armed forces of Belarus and Russia. We are doing this for ourselves and essentially to show that we are ready to defend ourselves and do not pose a threat to anyone.
But the active phase of Zapad 2025 is scheduled for September 12th to 16th. During this period, an increased presence of Russian units is expected, including tanks and armored vehicles.
They don't believe in this. And we don't believe that it's possible to cross the Belarusian-Ukrainian border from here right now. We know what's happening at the border. It's completely reinforced with mines. It's mined. If you try to go there, you'll lose 1,000 people.
Well, of course.
Lukashenko has repeatedly assured that the upcoming exercises pose no threat to either Ukraine, the Baltic states, or Poland.
They keep warning like, oh, the Suwałki corridor. They'll go to Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, seize 3 countries and so on, NATO countries.
However, he said the same thing back in 2022, claiming it was impossible to invade Ukraine from Belarus after Zapad 2021, but a week later he gave his territory to the Kremlin to attack Ukraine.
You accused Russia, Belarus that we would invade yesterday, that we would invade Ukraine. We did not invade. So your intelligence and the billions of dollars you spend are worthless.
In response to the exercises in 2025, Poland will conduct its own strategic exercises called Iron Defender, which will also involve some NATO member countries.
The very fact of the Russian-Belarusian exercises does not pose a threat to Poland. The Ministry of National Defense is taking them seriously. At present, there are no signs that these exercises could escalate into the threat of an armed conflict.
The commander of the Lithuanian army stated that about 40,000 military personnel will be concentrated in the Baltic states and Poland.
After the events of 2022 in Ukraine, these exercises have acquired clearly defined boundaries in terms of perception. They are now being seen not just as exercises, but as something possibly more than mere military maneuvers. There will be disinformation coming from absolutely all sides. 90% will be Russian, and unfortunately 10% will come from other sources. Hysteria will be fueled.
The situation on the border with Belarus and the monitoring of Russian military activities remain in the focus of attention for Ukrainian forces.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said he will meet Zelensky on September 5th, right after returning from Beijing. During his talks with Putin there, Fico compared the European Union to a frog at the bottom of a well, with a limited worldview. In his opinion, the EU cannot respond to global change, whatever that means. Meanwhile, Hungary's Prime Minister Orban seems to have pushed the EU to the limit. 10 member states proposed changing the rules for foreign policy decisions from unanimity to qualified majority. The reason? Hungary's constant vetoes on Ukraine-related initiatives. More details in our report.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The European Union has begun considering abandoning unanimous decision-making due to Hungary's constant vetoes.
We have 6.6 billion euros blocked, and we offered our Hungarian colleagues various options. For example, to abstain, as was done in NATO, and other possibilities. But there was no effect. And today, all the countries raise this issue of unblocking. You don't have to be part of this, but let others do it.
Against the backdrop of escalating security risk for Europe, the issue of consensus, of decision-making now, well, let's say, yes, the requirement for 100% of EU member states' votes will be reconsidered. How much time this will take and how exactly this decision will be reconsidered, what kind of algorithm will be proposed, it's hard to say right now.
In recent months, Hungary has been turning more and more towards Russia in exchange for cheap Russian gas and oil.
We're talking now as if this is an open-ended military situation, but that's not the case. The Ukrainians have lost the war. Russia has won this war. The only question is when and under what circumstances the Western countries backing the Ukrainians will acknowledge that this has happened and what follows from that.
Hungary is not some kind of structural pillar for the European Union. nor is it a strong or significant economy for the EU. Essentially, it's just that Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, is constantly exploiting the blocking of European issues.
Hungary's foreign minister is threatening Ukraine with a power cutoff over attacks on Russian oil facilities.
There is a very explicit anti-Hungarian policy being carried out in Ukraine, and Ukrainians expect that Brussels and their Hungarian appointees will put enough pressure on Hungary for it to take a position that aligns with Ukraine's interests. Hungary supplies 30 to 40% of Ukraine's electricity imports, and in this sector, the Hungarian government can create difficulties for Ukraine. Ukrainians would do well to remember this when, at various planning tables, they are deciding whether or not to bomb the Druzhba oil pipeline. So let this be on their minds.
And at the same time, the Hungarian authorities criticize the European Union and NATO, of which they themselves are members.
The Russian-Ukrainian war is a European issue, and you Europeans are incapable of solving it. When two strong men, the American and Russian presidents, sit down at the negotiating table and you shout from afar afterwards, you look pathetic and weak.
Are other European Union countries honestly tired of this kind of dependent attitude? Of course they are, because essentially Orban takes money in exchange for his blackmail. And we all understand perfectly well that the common pot of the European Union is filled by all EU countries. So simply paying Hungary for its loyalty is perceived quite critically by other EU leaders.
And Hungarian Prime Minister Orban actively uses anti-Ukrainian rhetoric in his election campaigning. The media reported that even US President Trump called Orban and asked him to change his mind.
We don't want Ukrainians to drag us into their war. We don't want Hungarians to go die for Ukraine. We don't want our farmers to go bankrupt. We don't want Europe to turn into their mafia nest. We don't want Hungarian money to be sent to Ukraine.
I think he will drag out this process, but at the same time send signals to Trump, so to speak, so that Trump doesn't get angry or offended and continues to communicate with Orban and bet on him as his political ally in Europe. But at the same time, he's not in too much of a hurry, so he can squeeze more blackmail money out of the Europeans for such decisions.
Orban has also stated that Hungary might even leave the European Union.
Hungary could leave the European Union in the foreseeable future, since the Union has transformed from an economic alliance into a political one. I can promise Hungarian voters one thing. If I see that EU membership is no longer worth it, I will speak out. But for now, I don't see any reason to do so.
If Hungary is not a member of the European Union, it will simply, with a high probability, fall into a deep economic crisis. Does Orban understand this? Of course he does. And I would see this simply as part of political rhetoric, nothing more, aimed against the current configuration within the European Union itself and portraying Orban as a great fighter.
But in reality, all that Hungary can actually do is sow discord within the organizations it is itself a member of. And even that opportunity will soon be gone.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.